Welcome to the Style and Vibes podcast with me, Michaela. I'll be giving you the inside scoop on music, fashion, culture, and more from Caribbean celebrities and tastemakers across the globe, pushing our culture with authenticity and, of course, style and vibes. Everyone, welcome to another edition of the Style and Vibes podcast. As you guys know, it is Caribbean American Heritage Month. It is also Black Music Month and Pride Month and Immigrant Heritage Month. A lot of things are going on this month. But we wanted to have a special conversation. It's something that I have not done here on the podcast, so I think you guys are really going to enjoy. So today I am joined by some amazing podcasters, thinkers, speakers in the space of the queer Caribbean. So we're going to talk the things about that. And as you can tell by the exciting title of this podcast, that we are going to be talking about queerness in dancehall and Jamaican culture specifically. So we're not going to cover everything here, but I wanted to get some resident experts through experience as well as being part of the community. So welcome Stush and Bush crew, Khadieme and Robert. Introducing yourself, please.
Hey y'all. Hi. What's up? Hey, thank you so much, Michaela, for having us. We are very excited.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, girl. Okay, yeah, sure.
No matter shy of the thing.
Yeah, I'm not really shy. I'm just look humble at the start. My name is Khadieme. I use they, them pronouns. I am currently, I don't know if this is a podcast, so I'm dark skinned. I'm wearing a headscarf. I'm just like a little, yeah, I have a headscarf on, and that's my visual descriptor. Lit. Period. I am one half of Stush and Bush, whichever one you'll find out soon enough. And I am really excited to be here, Robert.
Yeah, I don't like to keep the people guessing. So my name is Robert. My pronouns are he's, him, and himself, and I am the Stush to Khadieme's Bush. I'm also really excited to be here. You know, I look great is what I look like, right? I look great. And if you happen to also know that I look great, message me and tell me so, because I need the affirmations.
Not only that, but the skin just looked flawless.
Truly, because I'm moisturizing the skin this morning. I brushed my teeth just before to make sure my breath smell nice and clean.
Bread can't smell good. Bread can't smell good when podcasts are going. No.
You don't want to come back in your ways. So
right, you know. If there's anything we know, if the hot breath can come through the COVID mask, the hot breath can come through the screen. So y'all better brush your teeth on these Zoom calls, y'all. Yes.
Indeed. And so you guys already know we're going to be in for a lot of fun. Of course, it's a somewhat of a serious topic, but we're not going to go too deep into all the things that, you know, can make this messy. Like, I just want to have a really honest conversation about the music and what we're kind of seeing, what has happened kind of historically and what is kind of happening now. So tell us a little bit about your podcast and how you guys got together. And we'll talk the things then, but you have to tell the people then where you guys are hit, what CARICOM country on our hail from.
I CARICOM.
You know, plenty of people say, well, certain countries are not in the Caribbean, but if you have West Indian history, you know that all of the countries that are included. So that's why
we're not gonna touch that one because, as you said, we're not trying to be messy this episode. Although I am here for some mess. Sushant Bush is a Caribbean podcast on Caribbean happenings over a mix up on blend
with a queer twist.
That was perfect, girl.
You're welcome.
I'm from Jamaica, so I moved here 8 years ago. Graduated high school and came here for college, and I've lived in lived in New York ever since. And I am living in Brooklyn right now. And I rep Brooklyn, period. But yeah, that's where I'm at. That's Stush and Bush. Robert?
Yeah, I mean, I have parentage from all over the place. And by all over the place, I really do mean that my father is from Trinidad and Tobago and my mother is from Jamaica. They both came here when
You
they
know,
were
I'm saying
young.
Jamaica.
Jamaica. But I promise you, we are from the bush. No uptown Stush girl here. But, you know, America being America does things to people in diaspora. But we'll talk about that, you know, part 3 to come a few years from now. Stush and Bush happened because Khadieme sent me an email on the Caribbean.com website and was like, hey, I see that you have Caribbean.com. I also thought about Caribbean and I think we should have a conversation about how we can work together. I ignored the email.
Yeah. Yeah, he did. He did. Let's always say that. Come on,
But
accountability.
Spirit made sense for alignment. And a few months later, they messaged me on Instagram, and I was like, shoot, I gotta respond. We responded to the message. We met for lunch. I think what was interesting is that I was wearing a cape and you were wearing a cape, and I'm like, oh, so this is gonna work. And I think like I walked into like that meeting going, either I'm gonna have to kill this person because there can only be one Caribbean.com, or Khadieme is going to have all the things that I don't have. And then when we come together to like bring our ideas, our essence, our being in one place on a single project, we can do some really amazing shit. So that's what we did. And I think maybe 3 months later, we launched the podcast.
Yeah.
And I know it was meant to be because a lot of people were like, oh, so how long have you known Khadieme? I'm like, I just met this. I just met you. I don't know who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when the energy is there. So
Yeah,
as I like to say, the vibes is there.
Mm-hmm.
It was an instant click. It was like, oh yeah, oh you too, for real. That's your experience. And it's just been obviously an amazing journey since like the launching of the podcast. And I think even since then we've both grown and learned in so many ways. That's always so gorgeous and wonderful to see. So
it is beautiful. So I actually got introduced to you guys through Kerry, who actually edits this podcast and produces this podcast. So she's been doing some really amazing work with the Caribbean podcast directory. So when I saw that, I was an instant fan because you know how I don't even have to get into how we know about the position of being queer or from the LGBT plus community and being Caribbean. So it's definitely a much needed voice. And I think you guys are doing some really amazing work. So this really isn't about, if you guys really want to hear, you guys really have to hear a lot of the topics that they are talking about. They share their personal journeys as well as their scholarly journeys, and look a mix up, the mix up nice. Me appreciate it. So you guys have to check them out. Yes, just a little bit, just a chups, you know. And they keep it fun and they keep it very educational. And for me, it was a great perspective and just hearing, because it was something that I have only been the outlier of and observing, because, you know, maybe really understanding how to be a better ally is what I would say, kind of listening with that ear in mind, essentially. So but it's the first time we're kind of really discussing this topic here on the podcast. So you guys have a lot of content, so I'm not going to dive into that. I think the purpose of wanting to really discuss queerness and being male and gay in the Caribbean, specifically Jamaica, it comes with a lot of connotations already associated with it, and it really comes from society, but it's permeated through music and in very particular ways. The idea of the number two, which really stems from, you know, Terra Fabulous song, "Me no play number two, enough man I love a Vaseline for true." Like that line has become, you know, synonymous with the number two. And, you know, fast forward to just culturally, I'll be in conversations with men and they're like,
they skip over the number two because of the connotation of being gay being associated with that particular number. So this is really a play on, you know, the things that we've seen and heard and partake in the music, and really diving a little bit deeper into like that understanding. We've come a long way. We all know, you know, we're all familiar here with, you know, the lyrics, you know, we're familiar with the bravado, we're familiar with the ideas that are being perpetrated and continued to being discussed in the music. But how has that really impacted you guys growing up? Like just the music in general. Like I know it's not like you hate all dancehall music, but what is your connection to at least some of the music and the lyrical content that you've heard over the last, I would say, 30 years plus? I mean, I know I'm not age, you know, but yeah,
Oh, you know.
me not age, you know, but you know, it's just, it's been a long time, and it really is uniquely the only genre where men definitively, you know, protest their sexual preferences, right? So and it's not just done in like one-off songs, it's done like a lot, and it's might not be the whole entire song anymore, but it is referenced to, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So what has been your experience with the culture and the music as you have grown up listening to a lot of it or hearing a lot of it?
Yeah. Uh, yeah. So I'll sort of start by saying, for a variety of reasons, dancehall wasn't the number one genre of my entire childhood, right? Which isn't to say that like I wasn't a huge dancehall fan, but it is to say that like I wasn't always paying attention to the age. I think I my connection to dancehall sort of like increased, ironically, with once my connection to queerness increased as well, which was sort of like, and also my desire to reconnect back home once I sort of was here. But growing up, and I think we, like Robert and I talked about this number few business, which is,
All you say, number few.
yeah, of course. No. I, you know, I won't run from two. I promise. But I remember growing up, and one distinct memory I have with like this number two business is I I was reading the Star, which, you know, if you're from Jamaica, you know we have like couple major newspaper outlets: Star, Glean, Observer, and I was reading the Star, and they were giving some awards that was happening, and they were placing them first, second, third, fourth, etc. And the person who came second and had the number two, it wasn't the number, it was just a sign that said few. So it was just like one, one, few, 3, 4, 5. And obviously, I think there was this general knowledge of where that came from. And I think it also happened at a point where I wasn't necessarily reckoning with my queerness as much. But I knew that it sort of like came from that space of like, okay, number two is somehow being associated, or the throwing away of number two is somehow being associated with the throwing away of queerness, or what is dubbed queerness. And my experience with that is sort of, okay, this is a general thing that's happening. This is the norm that it is. So it wasn't something that I was responding to in a way where it's like, oh, how dare they? And two is just a really cute number. It is. But that wasn't really what was going on. My relationship to dancehall at large is a little bit more fun than I think it has been in the past, right? I will say, regarding the homophobic lyrics, and we'll get into this a little bit more, like my main frustration is that like one song just really nice and one song just good, and this song just nice, and I don't just want one line really spoil the song. Like for me, it's yes, it's the homophobia piece, duh. And also that resurgence of that homophobia that really doesn't add much to the song, and in my opinion just really takes away from it. My opinion, I experienced it being taken away from it, period. Right. So, and at the same time, I'm going to sing every dancehall song, mostly created by women, and women artists, and I find that like a lot of women artists are really just top notch. Period. Better. Not less homophobia. I'm not really interested in measuring people's homophobia as much as I'm like, this is categorically a better song than a lot of these folks that we hold with a really wild esteem. Shensia da, Spice da, Lady Saw da. There are folks who always show out in their songs. But my experience with dancehall and my growing up is sort of this: the song nice, I'm going to sing this song. I'm well aware of its meaning. Um, and as I grew older, I sort of became a little bit more aware of like what these things really meant, and then reckoning with the fact that this is shitty and I also still like this song. So where do I go from here? um and I think that's not necessarily a new thing with queer people. I think queer people always have to sort of like toe that line between this is pleasurable but this can also cause me harm. And I don't necessarily think that like this is an entirely different piece to it, right? It's one of the things that we reckon with. And we're gonna get into the other ones as well. I'll stop right here for now. But growing up, it's been, I love this. I have come to know what they mean. I still like this. So where do I go from here? And where do I go from here is I'm gonna enjoy the song, but there are certain parameters around how and where I experience the song and what my response to these songs are going to be when they happen, or wherever they happen. I'm gonna stop right there for now.
Robert, what's your take?
You sure you don't want to keep going?
Honestly, girl, I felt myself going. I felt myself like going in, and then I'm like, you know what? Let me get a little space. Let me go to a little space. Honestly, that's what I was thinking.
Well, thanks. But it also gave me some time to do some more reflection. I'm recognizing that there's a generational thing that's going on, right? Like dancehall also wasn't something that was played in my house when I was growing up, like preteens to teens, because my grandparents on either side are ministers. So it's like Caribbean gospel music. And then my parents were really sort of like either listening heavily to like soca, or were more so like on the reggae, not necessarily dance hall side of like, listening to music. And I remember the first time experiencing spillover from one of the songs, Chichiman. There was this guy that was in my house, and I think I had to have also been like maybe in my preteens. And in my house, he like whispered to my cousin that like I was a chichi, and I'm like, and I knew that it didn't feel good, but I didn't have the reason for why it didn't feel good.
Mm-hmm.
And then I experienced the song, and I'm like, okay, interesting. I believe that Jamaicans are among the most inventive people in the entirety of this planet. Mm-hmm. And Chichi is an amazing invention as a homophobic slur. Like, go off. That doesn't mean it's not violent, but there's cultural work being done there that I find to be interesting, because I focus not just on like what my experience is, but then also sort of like a deeper knowing of what homophobia feels like, even without the context. And now that I have the context later on in my life, I'm trying my best not to be dismissive. Right, earlier, Khadieme, you were talking about how you experience like that often one line, man to man that wrongs condemn, or
yeah,
what like any other variation of that line. You said that like you experience it as like detracting from the song. I also feel that, and I see it as playing a particular role in crafting a song, right? Almost begging the question, is it possible for me, this, dancehall artist, to be heterosexual, to be like a dancehall man, if I'm not also distinguishing in terms of sexuality and in terms of like what type of sex is being performed, what a gay man will do versus what I'm going to do. And then also what I'm going to do to women as opposed to what other men do to each other.
Like, I think the sex conversation in terms of dancehall, it's always kind of had its place, the sexuality part. So even in, going back to the Terra Fabulous song, it's not really about being gay or not, or like the song is really about bigging up a woman, but the need to definitively make a statement that it's only women that I'm into. Like, there's some cultural exploration to kind of really happen there. And that really, for me, there's a deeper root to why Jamaican men in particular feel the need to definitively state their sexual preference, because it really doesn't happen in any other music genre. Yes, I've heard gay slurs and queer words used in derogatory ways, but it's not as forthcoming as it is. Like, you can literally every other song in a male dance hall, like if you listen to a rhythm, there's always a reference, you know what I mean, over time. I think that has changed a whole lot in the last, I would say, 10 years, in terms of the references are much more subtle now. They're slightly different. They're not, and I think, Buja's Boom Bye Bye really caught it, like it became the poster child of negative lyrics that has essentially haunted his career, if in a sense, if they believes that in a way. But it seems to be the poster child of that era, right? It was, a song that he created in 1992. He doesn't even perform that song anymore, but that doesn't mean that his ideals have changed. It's just he's, and maybe it has. I don't know. It's a conversation I would have to have
He
with him directly.
apologized, I think,
Yeah.
like some time ago or something like, right? Something like that. And then was like, y'all need to treat everybody with respect. I'm not sure. I was just offering that I remember somewhere
I don't have that
down the line
reference
he
point. I know
apologized.
that it's a song that he doesn't perform anymore. And
Mhm.
like many artists, even, I've seen people performing and they no longer sing out some of those lyrics, or they change them a little bit. So it's almost like you have an A side and a B side, or it's much more subtle. It's really just focused on the girls and that's it. It's not necessarily definitively saying, that you have to describe. So I think that there is some progression in the music, but I don't know that there's progression culturally that is happening, or at least as fast as I think we are experiencing. We're in a state where we're seeing a lot of chaotic conversations around buggery, and like even the idea of buggery and gayness in Jamaica. And and in everyday conversations it doesn't really come up, but there's always this media storm, or Twitter war or Instagram comments. Like, I see them all the time, but it's not a general conversation that we often have around the positioning and why. So I mean, you guys are really kind of sharing a lot in terms of just your experience with the music itself, and I think that that's key to really having a better understanding. But a lot of the societal claims really come from biblical references. So Robert, you talked about your parents being of ministry. That's a unique voice and space to be in as well, because essentially many of these quote unquote claims to why queerness and gayness and this is it and thisness is wrong have been rooted in biblical spaces, and it's often the one or two reference in a Bible, in a Bible, the Bible, whichever religious book you choose, that people often use it as a sort of crutch and or evidence for resistance as to why these things shouldn't happen. So what has been your experience around that particular, because that's very different.
Yes, you were talking about progression earlier, and I think I want to reterm progression as work being done, right? So, like, as there is a shift in how people are talking about, um, or sort of like fitting in or like leaving out that one liner to sort of like distinguish what is uh same-sex relation versus what is heterosexual sex. I think that there's more coded language being placed on the bodies of women in the language of the song that still does the same work but in a different way, because I believe if we zoom out a little bit, like what we're commenting on is like a general oppression of people who are not straight men, right? To get to the piece on how uh this sort of like gets distilled in society, I think that there are points where homophobia is furthered and points where it's preserved. And I think that the church, especially in Jamaica and I would say the Caribbean at large, does a really good job at preserving homophobia, right? Like I believe Jamaica still holds the record for having the most churches per square mile, right? So it's just like there is a pervasiveness of church life in the Caribbean. There's a particular passage, and I believe we spoke about this on one of our episodes, and I'm having a hard time remembering which scripture verse it is in particular, but it's the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And for people who have had a sort of like Protestant, Christian, Catholic upbringing will be familiar with this story. People take it to mean that God rained down fire and brimstone, destruction on the town of Sodom and Gomorrah because there were some gay things happening in the midst of the people. And what I think it's important for us to sort of like do is that like there's like some reading that needs to happen. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah mirrors another story that happens later on in maybe Leviticus. In Sodom and Gomorrah, one of the angels is present in Sodom and Gomorrah, and he's sexually assaulted, right? And it's believed that because of the act itself, like the same-sex act, God rains down destruction. I want to pause and like draw out two things. One, same-sex, gay sex, sex in general requires consent. What happened there was not consensual. Quite frankly, it was rape. So I don't believe that what we're actually looking at is quote unquote homosexuality, but what we're looking at is rape. I believe that's the thing. I want us to question, why is it that there's a connection between rape and same sex? That's not a biblical connection that is made, that is a human connection that was made. What happens later on, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to like find it maybe in the notes or whatever, show folks where the mirror is, but the same thing happens later, although this time I believe to a woman, not an angel, I will add. She's assaulted, her body is divided up, cut into pieces, and then scattered amongst the tribes. No destruction, right? What might be this like piece of tension that we find sort of like biblically? It requires some reading, some interpretation of how we approach biblical text. The Bible is also a book. From my tradition as a Christian, I believe that it is also divinely inspired. And also, you know, the proverbial man, in quotes, is the one who's writing this book. So the context of the time that they're living in, the context that we interpreted in, and then this actual story of the Bible itself are three different ways of interpreting that. and I could get into the Greek mythology, but I already butchered the Greek mythology in another conversation some time ago. But it is in hospitality, in the time of the Bible where people are writing, that I believe is impacting the story itself, right? So there's some work that we need to do. And even if people are listening to this and like going, no, I don't believe that, I want you to pause and notice where tension is showing up, right? Is it possible for you to pause, take a breath and go, well, is this possible? Am I open to an additional interpretation? What I'm going to say in this moment is that it's not my job to change your mind to go, your interpretation is totally wrong. I can't tell you what to do. That's you. Live your life. What I am saying, though, is that you get to add to that story another version of it that offers a fuller picture of what might actually have been going on.
And that was a sermon right there. Child.
Period.
As the kids say, period.
And period.
Right. Not us being kids though, but right.
Be young, all you mean. I think all really great points, and I don't think I need to really dive deeper into that, because I think that that was such a good interpretation, especially, you know, the inspiration behind a lot of, you know, thoughts that really do happen. Khadieme, the idea of queerness, and I wrote it down. What exactly does that mean, and is it different for individuals, and how do you approach that term? You know what I mean? I mean, growing up, it's always felt derogatory, but now it feels like how women have taken the word bitch, or, you know what I'm saying, and like kind of taking it back, and it now means something else. Can you kind of take me down that journey of what that means for you, and how has the community now embraced queerness, and what does that mean, and how can people really approach that term specifically?
Yeah. So what it means to me, queerness, it's more than who I'm attracted to. It's more than oh, actually, yes, more than who I'm attracted to, which is oftentimes what it's denoted as, right? And queerness for me, it's saying that I'm existing in this realm of non-normativity, right? Like, in the way that I live my life, I can never be a part of this heteronormative world that has been established on my end, right? So like, I cannot be the cisgender, heterosexual, straight white man that this world tells us all to be. And many of us don't fall into that category, right? For a variety of different reasons. And queerness is that, and queerness, having that personal identity, it then you realize that personal experience of of existing in that non-normativity becomes political, in that it goes against the grain of society's norm, right? Like, the very existence, me just breathing, is somehow not okay, right? And like, that's a very important thing to recognize, because then it becomes politicized, right? It becomes politicized in that if you don't necessarily subscribe to this kind of norm, this is what you experience. And we see the different things that queer people experience, either by interpersonal relationship, intra-community violence, systemic legislation barriers, like whatever it is, right? So for me, queerness is existing outside the norm, and queerness in and of itself really just means like non-normativity. But it's a political identity. It's beyond the, oh, Khadieme has sex with men. It's beyond that. It has become an identity that defines and, quite frankly, directs how I show up in this world. Show up in this world as somebody who's oftentimes told, or oftentimes shown, that they shouldn't show up unless it's straight, unless it's cis, unless it's white. And that's queerness. And I know that, like, you know, folks will be like, oh, so should I refer to people as queer just randomly walking on the street? Everybody's relationship to queer, to the word itself, queer, is different. Whereas my relationship towards it is a political kind of direction, et cetera, et cetera. I know people in my own community or in my own network who have a hard time sort of like subscribing to that word queer. And that's fine, right? Like they'll say like, I am this, I am that, and that's completely fine. And I think people's relationship to queerness is going to be different. We have seen like in recent days, and particularly in certain spaces, queerness being used to sort of like encompass everybody or anything or anyone that who's just sort of like outside of that non-normative space, and within that non-normative space actually, and folks have used it as a catch-all terms, whatever. I mean, people use queer and trans people use LGBTQ, but that's what queerness is for me, and that's sort of like how I experience and identify as queer. And yeah.
What about you, Robert?
I mean, Khadieme really sort of like get it, like heavy emphasis on queerness as a political identity. I think if it helps to sort of like see how they operate differently, I would say that I take on the identity of queer for political reasons, but I am gay, right? In that frame, LGBT taking the G for me is like, here's what I do in terms of like sexual orientation and identity. And then the Q, which some people might like refer to as the umbrella term, takes on a political term for me, in that when I say that I am queer, I'm letting you know that it comes with a certain type of politic, whether that be non-normativity, whether that be subversion, resistance to oppression, but then also like thinking about futurity. And what I want this space to be. There are some people who like respond viscerally to everyone is queer, right? When I say everyone is queer, I'm like, everyone is kind of queer. And in this moment, I'm picturing a world where not necessarily we're like devoid of oppression, but like the system that was created that makes it so that the things that I do, the people that I show love to, the people who I'm in community with are non-normative, no longer exists. Right? Like I'm talking about like betterment. I'm talking about a politic of care. I'm talking about access to things that people need literally to be able to live.
Yeah.
And just in terms of Caribbean, as we combine, identity, and essentially it just feels like you're solidifying your identity by identifying as queer and Caribbean. And why was that important for both of you? Especially, you guys came up with the same term, and before you guys came together, it's obviously important, just to discuss the two and why you think that is needed, as it's almost like its own subculture of the umbrella community. Talk to me about its importance.
Yes, to subculture.
Right.
I love telling this story. In 2018, whatever, I was at a conference giving a presentation on what Caribbean.com is. And it was for all Caribbean people in the diaspora, etc. And this guy, who I believe was from Jamaica, came up to me afterward and was like, I'm really proud of you because, you came here and you had the gall to talk about queer Caribbean identity. And I was like, the gall? Homeboy, we're both here receiving awards for the work that we do based in the Caribbean, and you're talking to me about gall? Interesting word choice. A few years before that instance, I had a woman at an academic poster presentation go, I've never thought to put together queer and Caribbean. I didn't even think that queer people existed. Interesting that in any space that you inhabit, there are people who think it's not possible for something or some peoples or a combination of identities to exist in one body.
Yeah.
I understand not being in relationship and community with people, but I also want us to like think about the headspace that gets us into the thinking of, oh well, like that can't exist. it's not like we're talking about a platypus and a snail being, you know, any type of like Animal Crossing. Like, maybe it's not that. Maybe we're talking about social identities that there are people who can inhabit this. Also, considering how we like are here to talk about like music and dancehall, who must they be talking about? What is the commentary that is going on there? But the beautiful thing about Caribbean is that it belongs to nobody. And it took me some time to get there, but Caribbean.com belongs to us, okay? We hold the domain.
We paid for it. Okay.
Yearly coin.
Yearly.
Okay. All right. The .net, the .com, the .gov. I own it all. But Caribbean itself belongs to every queer Caribbean person who finds themselves trying to get like a nice jazzy word to identify themselves. I think that Caribbean is both the person and it's the place. We create Caribbean right here as we are Caribbean people. And it's like the merging of the two in a way where people think that's not possible. We go, it is possible. And there is beauty and there is life, there is language, there is culture being produced in this thing. If you go on Twitter and you're searching Caribbean, we don't come up. Well, we're there, but like we don't come up, you know, like there are other people who are like, I am Afro-Caribbean, or I am this Caribbean, this, or I'm a Caribbean, that like people who have seen the website, haven't seen the website, eventually go, here are these two things that I'm being told exist in tension in me. And not really. There is tension, but the tension isn't internal. We're put into a vacuum almost that goes, there's tension, so feel it. And because of, you know, how the body works and how trauma happens, we can absorb that, but that's not natural. We can be complex people. Black people ain't all the same. Caribbean people are all, you know, aren't all the same, yet we don't, like no one's questioning the possibility for me to be in heritage from both Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica. Oh, motherfucker, the girls hate each other. And, you know, I will not engage in diaspora wars today, but it's possible.
Yeah.
I think what came to mind essentially really is, you know, there are so many different stereotypes that as people grow and try to re-identify themselves within communities, creating new and different names helps us break some of those stereotypes within the communities that we exist in. I mean, you know, for a long time, a lot of people thought that all Caribbean people of Caribbean descent in New York or Miami or any of the major hubs for Caribbean people were all Jamaican, or they're all, you know what I mean? Like, and that those are things that we have to dispel. Hence the diaspora wars. The diaspora wars exist because everyone was being lumped in, and it's the diaspora wars really happen because everyone is saying, see me, I'm here. And I'm different. I'm part of the family, yes, but there are some significant cultural things that I want you to identify me with. So that's really interesting. Khadieme, I cut you off as you were sharing.
No, that's a really cool point. You know, as Robert was talking, deep in my brain came a memory of this time I was, I love telling stories. If you notice one thing about the podcast, we tell stories, etc., etc. In my memory, in said memory was this instant of me. I was living in China for a interesting time in my life. And I was at some random city, drunk with with one other black person and a random other white people. And then somebody heard my accent and was like, oh, where are you from? And I'm like, from Jamaica, da 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 da. And then he looked at me straight up. This white man looked me in my face and was just like, gay people like you are there? And this is a country, China, 12 hours from us, maybe 14 if you're not on the good flights. And and who's sort of like asserting to me boldly that like someone like me doesn't exist. And I didn't have the language that I have now, but I was pissed, first of all. And I think now as I'm reapproaching the situation, I right now I'm curious, right? And like some of the answers I have and some of them I don't, which is sort of like what series of events, what set of circumstances have happened where constantly queer Caribbean is never allowed to mesh, or not even allowed, but sort of like if that is the case, then it's sort of like met with this shock value, or when it is met, it's like I heard when folks do know of Caribbean folks or do talk to Caribbean folks, and this has happened to me as well, it's like we're only sort of like put in this, I heard that you're likely to die if you went back home. And this kind of weird thing where we're placed in our deaths or in our violence, or placed in our erasure, which really not very different from each other, violence, death, erasure. It for me is what brought on this I need to assert that like these two identities not only exist, but I'm not the pioneer in it existing. So obviously we know that there's history of like J-Flag from 1998. There were organizations from way before in Jamaica and in many other parts of the Caribbean, et cetera, activism, visibility, it's all been a thing. But then I was like, I need to find more people, and it's very interesting. And I think one thing that Robert and I feel like we should talk more about is like how Caribbean itself brought us together. Caribbean was the focal point that said, Khadieme, reach out to Robert. And Caribbean was the focal point for folks reaching out to me saying, I came up with Caribbean or queer making and you took it. So let's be friends. And that's how this community is developed. And since one, meeting Robert, and two, meeting other people, there is this community of queer Caribbean people who are outwardly saying Caribbean here, Caribbean there. It's a hashtag that they'll use when they upload a selfie now. Like the word itself serves as some kind of hub, and we're just coming together for some of us. You understand? Not granted, there is a age thing there, and I'll recognize that because again, I talked about the tensions with the word queer. It's there, right? And so for me, like that's the beauty in Caribbean itself, is that like not only is it meshing our internal sort of like feelings and experiences together, but it's connecting all the folks who've had this similar experience in a way where we can come and be like, oh yeah, we're here, tell me about this, and it starts the dialogue and it starts the conversations beyond the, oh, we're so oppressed. Like it allows for us to envision and create the kind of realities where we are queer and Caribbean and existing simultaneously.
I'm going to stop you right there.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of the Style and Vibes podcast. If you like what you hear, and I know you do, share it with your friends and family. If you want more, make sure you visit styleandvibes.com and follow us on our social channels, Twitter and Instagram @Style and Vibes. Until next time, Leah Tommy Peeps.